So today I'm here with a special guest and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself to the audience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darla Colinet, and I'm very honored to be here on Kingdom Talks to talk with you about relationships and how you can tell if they're healthy, unhealthy, or abusive.
Thank you, Dala. This leads me to the question about love and relationship. We live in a world where we don't take these four letters very seriously. The Bible says in John 3:16, it's a verse that we all know off our heads. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. Human relationship is all about love. But why is it that we live in a world where we don't really believe in love, or we can't even define the word love to even to speak about what it is? Is it based on feelings? Like it's a very complex and a broad terminology that we don't know what it is, but we just use it anyhow. So can you define what love is?
One of the greatest tools I ever created is a worksheet called What is Love? And it helps you define your definition of love. So
Mm,
I've come to learn throughout my life, through years of working with many women that were struggling with love and in abuse too, how to deal with this and how to get to the core of this. So we all need to discover, we need to know what our definition of love is in black and white. So we need to write that down. What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What does it
mm,
look like? And then we need to go to the next step, which is, okay, where did these definitions come from? Most of them came from our family experiences, from other experiences in our life with relationships as we go through dating or whatever we learn. But we also learn what love is just in the family unit, which can really
mm,
be detrimental if it's not a healthy love. So although my parents were Christians their whole life, they were very broken. My mom was Native American and she was
mm.
abused her whole life till 17. She
Wow.
was very broken. Um, so when you come from brokenness and don't find healing and get therapy and start learning what is healthy, you just pass on what you know. And, I love my mom and I've forgiven her for all kinds of things said and done. But the reality is you can only do what you know. And this is where we as Christians, get tripped up. So we come into our lives and what we experience as love, we assume is our definition of love. But then we also assume several other things. We assume that if there is another Christian, then their definition of love is like our definition of love, or
Interesting.
they should be like Jesus. So we make these assumptions. Then we fall in love and, all this other stuff, or we get hooked into relationships because we think we can save someone or help someone, which is a lot of abuse too, because we should be good Christians. So a lot of our beliefs and stuff happen
Mm,
from misunderstanding scriptures, misunderstanding preachers and what they're telling us too. And we also, as a church, don't have this laid out definition as we grow up as a teenager and say, okay, let's look at our definitions of love and then let's look at Christ's. So when we look how Christ did love, and it had boundaries and it had respect and it had the freedom to choose, and it didn't have belittling or any of the other things in it. So when we start going to his standard, then we look at our relationship and ourselves and go, "Ooh, I'm falling short," or "Whoa, my spouse or my partner is falling short." Then comes the question, are you both going to work on it? Are you both going to go to Christ's standard and therefore work to have the best relationship possible? Or are you going to find out you're not living to God's standards, which was my case in some ways, and then my spouse, who proclaimed to be a Christian, they decided they weren't changing. So again, you can't follow Jesus and abuse your spouse. It doesn't work that way. You know, it just doesn't. But as Christians, we are very, very blindsided because we grow up just assuming that when we start knowing God and Jesus, all of a sudden Jesus is going to download his love to us, just boom, like we understand it. Well, we understand in our heart that he loves us, but we don't know what healthy is like if we've never seen it. And
Mm,
we also don't even know that we can change our definition of love or even how to begin.
mm,
So that's kind of been my process of helping people just understand, okay, what is your definition of love? Where did it come from? Did you know you can change it? Do you want to change it? And then here's how we do it. And you take God's hand and you walk that walk. But until you know those steps, a lot of us are living in unhealthy behaviors and thoughts without even knowing it. I know lots of Christians that um, get upset at their job or whatever, and then they take it on their spouse and they're disrespectful and blah, blah, blah. But it's continual. And so people come to me and they say, is that abuse? And I say, well, absolutely it is. Is it disrespecting? Is it dishonoring? Is it degrading Christ in you when he says that to you? Yeah. So therefore, it is. Now, not a reason to get divorced, but it's a reason to go to the spouse and say, you know what? Jesus lives in me. So anything you say to me, you're saying directly to him. So I think you maybe should step back and think, what am I saying to you?
just to uh add to what you're saying, that people look at love in a different way, and you allow people to define what love is to them, because
Yep.
the way I give love and the way I receive love might be different from the way you give and receive love.
Yeah.
If we are looking for a standard of how to give love and how to receive love, we look at Jesus. And there's one thing that you and I, we, according to the scripture, that giving is like a key component of love, because the Bible says, "For God so loved the world, He gave," and God Himself is love. You cannot tell me that you love somebody if you don't love God, because where do you really get that true agape love? And even at that, there are definitions of love, like brotherly love, the unconditional love. The unconditional love, that is the hardest of love. So how can we achieve that agape unconditional love? Just to look at somebody and just love them without any reason.
I think we have to first look in the mirror ourselves and say, am I a perfect person without brokenness, without hurt, without desire to be loved and valued?
Mm,
That's where we start. And that's what we look at. I mean, God knows every single one of us is imperfect, and every person has been broken, scarred, hurt, um, you know, at some point in their life, if they're more than 2 years old, and even at 2 years old, that can happen. But this life down here is really, really difficult. And
yeah.
so looking at people through Christ's eyes, which he did, and said, we're all broken, man. This is it. When you come across somebody who's being a bully, they're the most afraid person you'll ever meet.
Mm,
It's their compensation for protection. So if we can see past what they're saying and find a way to just reach out or say, hey, I see you in there, or, some compliment, something beyond what they're doing, and again, you have to have healthy boundaries. And that took me years to learn.
mm,
But and we can't make that misconception either, that unconditional love means Christians should be doormats. That's not what Jesus did. I mean, Jesus never allowed himself to ever be hurt or abused in any way until he gave himself over to be crucified.
mm.
So there
Interesting.
were many times people tried to throw rocks at him, tried to, but he didn't. He disappeared. So Jesus never talks about suffering in the sense of abuse. He talks about it in persecution because of our faith in him. So we have to
Mm,
be very careful to understand
interesting.
our unconditional love to others is showing that love. But if they choose to come back at us that's abusive or bad for us, then it's okay to walk away and shake the sand from our sandals, because we have to be healthy too. Jesus also never begged, pleaded, argued with anybody about love or sharing his gospel with them. He just shared it. And if they accepted it, he was glad and grateful and he welcomed them. But if they didn't, then he just moved on to the next person.
Mm,
So I think love is part of love too that people see is our peace and joy. And if people cannot see peace and joy in you, regardless of the circumstance, they're not going to open up. They're not going to trust that at all.
Interesting point.
Yeah.
Peace and love. Can you elaborate more on that? Peace and love. Why?
Because there is nothing like being in the middle of chaos and seeing someone at peace to know
Mm,
there's hope, at peace to know I'm not alone, that I can go to that person maybe and get some strength. There's also this magnetism of joy when you've got somebody who is just joyful in their heart and always looking at the positive and always
mm.
encouraging others. And who do you want to be around? Someone like that or someone who's a crabby?
Yeah,
You know?
that makes sense. That makes sense. Yes, somebody who's joyful and peaceful.
Yes.
You talked about abuse. How would you because most times when we hear the word spousal abuse or domestic abuse, we usually look at it from the physical aspect
Yeah, we do.
and we neglect the emotional, even the spiritual. It can also be spiritual abuse. You know?
Oh boy, I have, yeah, and I've walked through that too, unfortunately, with pastors, because in the 80s, when I first started talking to them, so in 73 was the first safe house created in the US. That's not very long. Well, come 84, I went to my pastor and told him what was going on. And I told him that my husband had put a shotgun in my mouth. And he told me that I needed to just submit, that I was married. I was 18 years old. What do you do with that? You
Wow.
know, it's like, are you kidding me? So that kept me in my marriage for a very long time because my parents also thought the same thing. You married him, this is your God vow and you're stuck, you know. And at 18, that is like horrible, horribleness. So abuse comes in many forms and we need to be educated. In fact, I created a course, we'll talk about it later, but it is for just anybody who wants to learn, but it's also for spiritual leaders that can be mentors, teachers, even that just need to know more about abuse and how it works.
Mm,
And it's psychological, it's emotional, it's physical, it can be financial. What financials holds women back a lot. Um,
wow. Interesting.
and just many, many aspects of it. There's 9 major categories of abuse. And basically, it could just be all whittled down to anything that's disrespectful, dishonoring. Abuse is all about power and control. So there's a lot of isolation and then just a lot of permission. You've got to ask permission. You've got to, you can't do this, you can't do that.
Mm,
And there's just gaslighting as part of it too, discounting your spouse in front of others. And, there's just a lot of manipulation. So if there's manipulation, deception, coercion, anything negative, basically, that's controlling, I think can be ruled as a form of abuse. Now, again, we often learn traits in our families that we don't even realize is abuse. Again, screaming
mm,
at yelling at somebody because you've had a bad day and then, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. But those patterns are abusive. So if
mm,
we take those patterns and put them into our marriage, and then we have a wife or a husband who has never dealt with the screaming and yelling,
mm,
they've always had the respect, then they're like, you love me. Why are you doing this? And
mm,
it's like, well, I love you too. Well, you love me, I love you. And so this is where all the misconceptions get started. But again, if we can train um, pastors and other people to really start looking at abuse and saying, we really need to train our congregations on what is healthy. That's what we really need to do. And then when we're talking about healthy love, we can also bring in a pattern of unhealthiness or extreme of abuse. And if people are having issues with that, then create classes from like exceptional love, classes that just really teach people how to go through this and understand, my goodness, I learned these things from my parents and now I've passed them on to my kids. Yikes. and then they're going to pass them on to their grandkids. And do you see the perpetual problem here?
Yeah.
So unless we learn something different, we can't do anything different.
Yeah, even when in the book of Isaiah, Jesus read that he has come to heal the brokenhearted.
Yes,
Well, like you said, we are all broken. How
yes.
can somebody who is broken be capable of giving love?
Well, and that's the whole problem is if you're broken and your love is broken, that's exactly what you're going to get, broken love. So my parents
Mm,
passed down their brokenness to me, which gave me the message that I was not valued. And unless I proved my value or did something good, then I didn't deserve even attention or love.
mm,
So, and then if love happened to have some bad, like hurtful words or physical stuff going on, then,
mm.
they still loved you. As long as they apologized, it was okay. But you see, that set me up for being a victim of abuse right off the bat.
Okay, in my because I'm still young, so maybe in my in my contemporary time, uh, some of the young ladies that I speak to, they assume that
Yeah,
the way us as men we love or we express our love is through sex, whereas we see female, for them, money, we associate money and love, and then for them, they associate sex and love,
right,
money and sex. But the Bible never talks about sex or money, those two, to have anything to do with love. But in our culture,
right,
it's about a man wants to prove his love for that woman through sex, and the woman will say, "If you love me, give me money." Again, I'm not against you taking care of your wife
right,
financially,
right,
but if
right.
you're coming at it from that point of view that okay, to prove your love, you have to spend on me, and
Hmm.
then for the guy to prove your love for me, you have to give me your body.
Right, right. So again, unless they're both operating from Christ standards, then how do we get there? So one of my favorite things to do is to go to 1 Corinthians 13. And on that, it's verses 4 through, I think it is 4 through 7 here. I'm just going to pull it up and read it. And so one of the exercises I have people do for themselves is to put your name where love is. So the verse says love is patient. So I would say Darla is patient. Darla is kind and is not jealous. Darla does not brag and is not arrogant. I don't act
Mm,
unbecomingly. I don't seek my own way. I'm not provoked. I don't take into account a wrongful suffering. I don't rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoice with the truth. I bear all things, believe all things, hope all things, and endure all things. So when I put my name in that, I that's a checklist for me to go, am I doing these things? Am I honoring and respecting and being what I need to be? But the same thing is true of your spouse or who you're dating. Does this person do this? If this person is, they're not doing this list at all, run, flee, flee, because these are the standards of God. And if we start looking at each other, this isn't a checklist to say you're doing wrong, you're this, and this. This is a checklist to say these are God's standards, and we both have got to go to this. This is what I want to live at, and this is how God sees the marriage, and this is how it
mm,
becomes a partnership and a union. And when women are treated like Christ themselves. Like I said, if you really looked at the one you love and can see Christ in them because of the words they say and the actions they do
mm,
consistently,
mm.
then whatever you say to that person, you're saying it directly to Christ. And I think one of the things I wanted to do as an artist, I drew a picture of Jesus, and I wanted to make these little, I don't know if you remember these, like overheads where you could see it's like a clear see-through screen stuff, and you could
Yeah,
write on. And so I'd love to print those off and put Jesus on a on a on a pop-up stick. Not that
yeah.
the drawing, But
Yeah.
I would like to hold that up, couples to hold that up to each other and start talking to each other.
Mm.
Because if they could really see Christ within each other, I think that would change a whole lot. I don't think you're going to look at Christ and say, "You really cooked a crappy meal tonight." Would you?
Mm.
And that's the whole point. We're just not taught to see Christ in each other. And I think if we were, and we knew his standards, then we would start behaving a lot better, not just to our spouse, but to our communities and to the world.
This leads me to the question regarding Christian women who are also kingdom women of virtue. I see that based on what you have read, that love is a trait, attributes, kindness, patience, endurance, and these are all attributes that we can also ascribe to the fruit of the spirit. It's
Right.
pretty much who you are. So love is your character. It's not just an action. Yes, you can do an act of love, but love is an innate, consistent behavior of who you are. It's your being, it's your essence, it's your identity. Um, what would you say to Christian women who are in an abusive relationship, but because they fear this traditional religious mindset that even if you're in an abusive relationship, like you said, you have to endure. When do we draw the line? When is it time for that young woman or that lady to say, you know what, enough is enough. This is not good for my mental health. This is not good for my physical health. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the gospel, but
Yeah.
I have to leave.
And you're not being disrespectful to the gospel. Marriage vows are very, very clear about honoring one another, um, and being there for one another. And it's a partnership. And the minute abuse happens, your partner has broken his vow, her vow, right then and there. And abuse can happen with women too, or men too, men and women likewise. It's just less often. But you've already broken the vow. So if you believe that you're stuck there because of a vow,
Mm,
at this point, you're released from that. And so that's the first thing I would say. One of the biggest fears of a lot of pastors is if people realize, Christian women realize that they're not anymore bound to the marriage vows because of abuse, we're going to have all these divorce. And my answer to them is, so you would rather have the woman destroyed or even killed just so the marriage stays intact. And what does that do to the kids? But perpetuate this whole problem. And is that really what Jesus would want to do? You know, if anything, Jesus came to set women free in a lot of ways. He, goodness, nobody talked to them. Nobody took their
yeah,
opinion,
yeah,
nobody
yeah.
anything. And so here comes Jesus, and not only women, but prostitutes. Oh my, and women that nobody wanted and
Mm,
discarded
yeah,
and
yeah,
all of these things. So he values women.
yeah,
Divorce
yeah.
was created to protect women. So, in those days, they didn't have anything, they didn't have any rights, and they didn't have any choice other than to be prostitutes at that point. And yet, God created divorce. God also divorced Israel because of their behavior and their disobedience and their, adultery, basically from Him. And so when you're in abuse, you have all these things going on, but it is never God's will for a woman to stay in an abusive marriage, period. Now, I say that, but then I also say caution. It can be very dangerous. It could be deadly to get out. And it may take a while and it may take a process. I would encourage them to contact the nearest safe house they have in the area. Um, I wouldn't go to your church first unless they've been totally trained in abuse. And that's just the reality, unfortunately, that I had to deal with too. But I would definitely go to a safe house and start talking to them and see how you can create a safety plan that you basically can make yourself, in case something happens, that you can run at that point and be safe. So that's number one. And then number two is, well, one, you're not obligated by God. Two, go to the safe house and get a safety plan. Three, this is an entangled snare. Okay. So if you're married and then you have kids too, you're not only
Mm.
dealing with yourself, you're dealing with them. You're
Yeah.
also dealing with financials. If he has all the finances, you're dealing with death threats. You're dealing with all the friends and stuff that he's gathered around that you won't
Mm.
have anybody. I was kicked out of a church because of this, and I'm the
Wow.
victim. So you, this isn't a simple, oh, just leave like people think. There are so many things to untangle and so many things that you've got to be careful of and that you've got to put in place that if you have kids, they're going to be safe and you're going to get out of there. When I left my first husband, I ended up going to two different states because he had sent men looking for me.
Wow.
So here I am running with two kids. I mean, it's just like a movie. It's crazy. So these threats are real, and you can't just ignore what's going on. So it's a big process. It's a mindset that they have to get out of and realize that they are valuable, that God loves them, and this is not God's will for them. Because after years of being beaten down and belittled and being scared, if you have no career skills, it's terrifying.
I mean, in the Western culture, women have rights. Um, and let's say I'm from Africa,
Yeah.
where women are taught to be submissive. If you
Yep.
end up with a good man and you're submissive, then good for you. I see this is sometimes how I tell people about respect and love when the Bible command that a husband love your wife respect your husband. I see that when you love your wife, you have to serve your wife because that's what Jesus did. He served the church. So you have to express that love by serving your spouse. Respect for me is submission. No, submission for me is respect. I see submission as respect, meaning that you consider the point of view of your husband. I'm not saying that your husband makes all the decision because at the end of the day, he doesn't know everything, right? But you put him in that place of spiritual authority, ask for his input because us men, when women ask for input, even though we don't have the answer, even though we don't have the solution, but just you acknowledging that we are important. Because another thing about respect for us men is importance, self-importance. If you give us that, but sometimes other men now take this idea of respect and submission in a wrong way, meaning that like a woman should submit to me when I'm doing something wrong. So in the African culture, that submission, especially in the church, not just in the culture, I mean submission, the idea of women submitting to their spouses in Africa is not just applicable in the church, also in the culture where women are being taught that everything that the man says or does, you just have to follow. You don't have to question. When I came
Right.
to this country called Canada, that was when I learned that it doesn't matter your gender. People
Yeah.
have an opinion. People have a voice. Women are very smart. Women are very intelligent. Women have ideas. Women can be in a leadership of authority. You understand? Even in church too. My pastor is a female. My pastor is a female, and I'm under authority. So that really changed my mind not to devalue or see women as second class citizens. I don't
Right.
think because most people say the Bible sees women as second class citizens. That's a
No.
lie.
Yeah.
Because Jesus talks about the Bible talks about the virtuous woman. The virtuous woman is like a contemporary woman who has morals, who has standards.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you said, Jesus was always going to those women who the so-called religious people have abandoned.
Yep.
The prostitute, the woman in the well. Nobody wanted to talk to her. Even the disciples, like
Yeah.
Jesus, what are you doing with this woman? But Jesus gave her a sense of purpose. And look, like there are women in the Bible who Jesus interacted with. There are women in the Bible who God used, who were important.
Hmm. I would encourage you to when you're telling them about how they should love God. So the verse of submission is there, but it says, "Husbands, love your wives like Christ." See,
Hmm.
the like Christ is the whole difference
Yes,
because
yes,
we're going to use their definition of love. So again, if we bring it back to Christ,
Yes.
and if they love their wife like Christ and respect her and treat, I mean, my husband right now, um, and we'll be married 9 years in March.
Nice,
Never was
nice.
going to get married again. Trust me, after three
Oh
abusive
boy.
marriages and 30 years, it was a lot. So this was a miracle, clearly from God. But for once, I really do realize what it means to be loved like Christ, because I didn't feel that from my dad either, or anybody. And so to finally feel that, I don't have a problem of submissive. I'm like, you know, and,
Mm,
you know,
mm,
something gets hard. In fact, if something's harder or it's like in the end, I'm like, ooh, this is your leadership deal because you're the
mm,
head of the house. And he kind of looks at me like, that's really not fair. But because of the respect in that. So
mm,
to me, submission is more of, I am glad to let you take lead because you treat me so well. That's not even a problem. And if you look
mm.
at the word submission in Hebrew, that's exactly what it says. You're treated so well that you don't even have a problem with that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
love like Christ.
That's even with God, even God demands us to, like, God doesn't force or impose himself upon us.
No.
It's our free will. Our
Yes.
free will. We choose to worship God. God doesn't come and take a knife. You must worship me, you must love me. You know what I mean? Like, you
Right.
emphasize that, husband, love your wife as who? Is it based on your upbringing, your friends, the culture, the society, or like Christ?
Right. And I think that's one of the harder things in different cultures. And again, growing up in Iran too, I understand, trust me, I understand that whole thing that women are disposable and they're just
Mm,
to be used and thrown away. So I get that whole idea. I understand that probably more than a lot of people do. But
mm,
if you say you are truly following Christ, you are going to follow the scriptures, all the scriptures, not
yeah.
just the submit one, but you will love her like Christ. And in fact, when I
Mm,
left my first husband,
sacrifice.
I almost committed homicide. Literally, I
Mm,
had a shotgun in my hand waiting for him to come home, and he never came home that night. Thank God. But the
wow.
next day, I'm like, what am I doing? And God said, run. And I ran to this one minister who he caught a lot of flack because his daughter had divorced her husband who was abusive. So I thought he'll understand. So I ran to him and he did understand. And he opened Ephesians for me and he said, okay, so you're hung up on the submit thing and everybody's been telling you that. But he says, but look at this other verse that says, husbands, love your wives like Christ. Has he loved you
Mm,
like Christ? And I went, no. And he says, exactly. He broke his
wow.
vows. You're done. You're free. Go save your kids. Go save yourself. And I did. I was like, I am free. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was no longer bound by my misconceptions.
I mean, because we should read the Bible carefully. Just like people say, money is evil. The Bible says the love of money is the root of the
Right.
love of money is the root of all evil, right? But
Right.
money in itself, it's good. But when you love it to the point where you will do anything to get it, you will sell drugs, you will steal, you even kill somebody, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So same apply in terms of love. Like husband, you can't just love is not abusive. Honestly,
No.
love is not abusive. It's
No. If
real
Jesus,
love. True love is not abusive.
no. And my thing is, if Jesus would not say this, think this, and do this, should you? Should I? And that should, long ago there was a thing, a bracelet thing called "What Would Jesus Do?"
Oh yes, yes.
And I really wish they'd bring it back because so we could snap ourselves and go, I don't think Jesus would have just said that. So I need to go back and apologize. I need to fix that. And if we start thinking that way, that we are Christ in the flesh, we're his representation, and we're doing a really poor job of it. I mean, if you look around the world, those who proclaim to be Christians, I have a hard time saying that word in the sense of we're not doing what we say we're Christians are supposed to be like Christ followers. So
Yes.
I tend to use the word Christ disciple because a disciple mirrors, teaches, learns, follows, and walks with him every day. And that's what we should be doing.
This leads me to the last question before you discuss about your book and how people can reach out to you. I'm fascinated by the humility of Jesus. What do you think? Do you think that humility can play a role in a relationship? Because that's something that when a husband is humble, when a wife is humble, because pride is deadly.
Yes.
Pride is contentious. Pride is competition. Pride is comparison. But humility is service. Humility is submission. Humility is regard
Yes.
for one another.
Yes.
So, what's your take on humility in a relationship?
Yes. Yes. Pride to me is, the word narcissist is always thrown out there, but it is true. It's all about me, and whatever I want and do, it's going to be all about me by any means. And that's kind of the way pride is. Pride becomes all about us. So love, as I read in 1 Corinthians 13, love doesn't put yourself first.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean you're a
Wow.
doormat, but it means you think of your husband. You go to the sink and you get a drink of water. Hey, hon, do you want a drink of water? You know, Start thinking about, if I need
Hmm.
something, does he need it? If she needs something, or yeah, does my wife need it? Start thinking about serving in just simple ways. And I guarantee you, if you just do those simple things here and there, or just a hug or a touch or a squeeze of the hand when nobody's expecting it, you'll be amazed how much hearts open up and just start to melt. Those who really, really want to be healthy. Now, I can say those people that are abusive, it's all but unrecorded that you find someone who totally conforms, because
Hmm.
abuse is very difficult to get rid of for one reason: submission and obedience. So to follow Christ, you have to submit completely to his ways and you have to obey them. For
Hmm.
abusive people, they more than likely have been hurt or abused in their life, and they know they refuse to be the victim, so they will not give up power and control by any means.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
that's where the problem comes in.
Wow.
So
Wow.
they can say, oh, God healed my heart. And this is where women get pulled back into it too. And I'm good for 6 months or a year. And then here we go again. And everything that I've read, and from people that have seen maybe one person out of 100,000, that person does a complete repentance. And that repentance is a lot like an addict. So they have a support group, they have a plan, they follow, there's accountability their whole life, because they
Hmm.
know they can fall into that cycle. So for abusers to totally walk out of this, just, forming a line saying, well, I don't want to be abuser anymore. Unfortunately, that has not been a proven fact. It's been more proven that they just walk away and find another victim.
Wow. Wow. So you can't just open your mouth to say, you know what, I'm gonna stop this behavior. This behavior has been in your life for so long that it takes time. It's a process. It takes divine intervention and accountability from your peers to ensure that you're not going back. You
Right, a
know.
real abuser. Now, there's a lot of unhealthiness that can happen. And again, if you start noticing this and you want to get better, absolutely, I can see, marriage is totally reformed when this person realizes, oh my gosh, and I don't want to be this. I don't want to be my dad. I don't want to be my mom. I don't want to be this person
Yeah.
that, I grew up with. So how do I learn steps not to? And again, that's a process too. But when you choose to live up to Christ's standards of love, anything's possible.
Mm. Wow. Wow. So one last question. This is a very interesting conversation. Let's say one person really wants to display Christ type of love, and the other person doesn't, or the other person doesn't know much. Obviously, as Christians, we should continue to do that till the person, maybe you never know, the person is saved, but the upbringing, they didn't really They didn't really, they cannot believe that they can be loved in such a way. It's like, you know how when people have never been loved before and then they meet somebody who is so joyful, who's so peaceful, when
Yeah.
situations happen, like, how come you're not getting mad? You should be
Yeah.
getting mad, like in a relationship. Why can't you think about that problem? Darling, it's gonna be fine. But no, it's not fine. Darling, I'm trusting God. So, but this is not. And then you have to display that Christ likeness, like what Christ did to his disciples. Some of them were stubborn, some of them were arrogant, some
Yeah.
of them were doubtful. Christ still displayed love, and the lack of patience sometimes we don't have.
Yeah, I mean, it can be very, very difficult with anybody. Again, our job is we need to be consistently showing Christ because we are going to be held accountable for that. Now,
Mm,
we can still invite them and say, it took me a long time to learn this, or it's
wow.
come through years, but I invite you to come with me and learn what I learned, and talk to
Mm,
your pastor and say, hey, can we meet and just talk about love? What does Scripture say about love? How do we start getting a conversation so they can learn? Because again, you can't do something you don't know. So
mm,
until they learn something new and practice it, it's not going to change. Now, if you get someone who says, yeah, how can you do it? But I don't have time for that. I don't want to do it. Again, if it's tough. If you've made the decision and you've been unequally yoked from the beginning, you just have to see where that all falls. And if it starts getting abusive, then you have to start making some decisions and, be open with them and say, this is not okay to treat me this way. And you can't, but you also have to be very careful. First time you do that, first time I did that, I ended up with a gun in my mouth. So, you know, it is very scary. If something happens when you ask someone not to treat you disrespectfully, then right there's a red flag. And if that starts right away, talk to a safe house. Start getting a conversation out there already because this person is not going to listen. In fact, there's a warning that I give all women, especially Christian women, um, if they are in an abusive relationship and they're getting all this advice that, oh, you need to communicate more, you need to be this more, you need to be that more, because you're a couple and you need to work as a couple. That doesn't work in an abusive relationship. And this is why. You
interesting.
cannot treat an abusive marriage or relationship as a partnership. It is a dictatorship. And you
Mm,
cannot tell a dictator what to do.
that's true.
You cannot send abusive, when abuse is happening in a marriage or with couples, you cannot send them to couples counseling. I don't do it because in a couples counseling, you're dealing on a situation like kids or money or something like where you both have a say, you both have a part, you both have a responsibility. In an abusive relationship, you don't have you're the victim. He's the responsible one. So he's lighting the house on fire. Meanwhile, they're yelling at you, trying to get you to fix it. You have no power. You don't have the match. you know so I think it's really vital for women to understand that you cannot be in an abusive relationship and treat it as a partnership because it's a dictatorship, and that's
Abusive
sad.
relationship. Wow. That's a good point. Abusive relationship is not, it's not partnership, it's a dictatorship. Because only one person have the full authority, call the shots.
Right.
Wow. And it's very hard to make peace when you're in a dictatorship environment.
Yeah, nothing
Wow.
nothing on the outside works. Any advice they give you for making healthier relationships is not going to work. It's going to backfire because they don't want to be healthy.
Hmm. And okay, how do people end up becoming abusive? Are they consciously aware of it or unconsciously? I mean, this is what they see in their upbringing. Like in my case, I live in a single with a single parent. I've never seen my dad. My dad is dead. But I've decided that God, I am not gonna pregnate any woman. At the end of the day, I'm not gonna be with that woman. So God has really kept me not to have any child out of wedlock, right? I
Right.
want to have a child when I'm married because I don't want to repeat what happened
Yeah.
in my life, you know?
Yes.
Even though at times I'm tempted to do that, but God, by His grace, has really, really helped me not to have any child with any one woman I'm not gonna get married to, because if my mom like, you know what, I don't want to carry this
Yeah.
single
Yeah.
in the black community, you know? So
Yes.
same with abusive. Let's say, for example, if you have seen, if you're raised in an abusive home, you have seen it and you have given your life to Jesus, you have gone through training and you are aware, because I did went through training and then you decide, you know what, God, I don't want to go this path. And I believe that you can change that. But what about those who grew up in an abusive relationship and they completely ignore that? They have seen it and that cannot pass on to them.
Again, it's always a choice. You made a very, very
Mm.
good statement. You chose to learn something different and do something different. So a lot of times when you're in that brokenness and that's all you see of love, first you got to realize that's not the only definition, and that it is possible, not just in the movies, but possible to actually feel love and be loved in a great way. And that's an epiphany. It kind of was for me, even though I grew up in a Christian home. It was like, wow, you mean this is totally different. So you get people that are really, really broken. One, they just don't even believe it's possible. Two, they don't believe they deserve it.
Mm.
So those two factors, when you accept Jesus into your heart, this helps these two factors, because you're like, okay, so now Jesus is living in you. Is Jesus worth it? Is Jesus love living in you? Then you either have to receive it or reject it. So those are choices. And if they can start seeing Jesus in them and saying, He does live in here, even though my life may not look like it yet. But if you take His hand and you learn His ways and you walk His ways, He can heal anything. And He can just redeem your life and give you a life that you never even knew was possible. But
Wow.
you've got to make those choices. And again, so if they know it's possible, and that's why we have to be God's love and joy and peace, so that they ask questions and maybe want to learn more. And then if they make that choice to have Christ come in your heart is also a choice to be His disciple. And so that takes hard work, and that's a lifelong road. But oh my, is it worth it?
Yeah, even me too. I was on this path where, because obviously I grew up in the hip hop culture, listening to hardcore rap music, looking at women shaking and all that stuff. So for me, my perception about women was completely disgusting. It was completely perverse, right? When I
Right.
gave my life to Jesus, I thought that all women are like, especially I thought that all black women are like that. They're just sexual. But then when I gave my life to Jesus and I met this humble Christian lady, man, God just used her. She's my best friend now. God just used her for her to really change my view about
Yes.
women. Because if God did not bring that young woman into my life to change my view about women, even though I am saved,
Right.
I will carry that perception. Like
Right.
for example, if I get married to a woman, I would see her that way. But God helped me to have somebody in my life who said, "You can't talk to me like that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't call me that. Show some
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah.
You can't come to my house at this time. You can't call me at this time."
Praise God. She was good.
Like, why you to talk to me like that? Like you don't give me attitude. I'm like, she really helped me
Yes.
to have respect for women, to see women the way God sees them. And she was so consistent in how she expressed love to God. She taught me the Bible. She made me believe in myself that I have what it takes, that God is going to use
Right.
me. You know,
Yes. Yes.
man, she
Now you
really
just
helped me.
yeah. But that's what it takes. I mean, you're asking questions that you already know the answer to because you walked it. And so now you just have to share what you know. This is the path to get out of the gutter and to work with Jesus to change your life and to have a whole new life that is so brings so much joy and peace and optimism of what's to come. Yes.
Kindly brief us about these magnificent books and your course, how people can access it, and the benefits, the value that they can get from it.
So you can always go to my website called godstransforminggrace.com, And on that, there's clicks to view the books and different courses and like this one love worksheet that I have that's available. There's a lot of free things available. Um, what's toxic healthy love? What you can do about it. So there's a lot of free resources and just things and information about divorce and abuse and all kinds of things they can learn. Um, I wrote my first book was a memoir. It's called Under the Staircase, and it's a
Mm.
really tough book. Requires Kleenex, um,
Mm.
but it's kind of my walk with
Oh
my
boy.
boys to get out of that first abusive marriage, which was really
Mm.
tough and horrific. Um, so that was a real tough one, but I think it's very important for women to see that just because you love Christ doesn't mean you can't end up in these relationships, because I did. And I think that's why
Mm.
God uses me too, to
Wow.
realize that I was trying to discover what his love was. I was trying to figure this out and I was determined I was going to do it. So, here comes Christian number two, supposedly, and I marry him. And that ends up in
Mm.
number three. So, and that
Wow.
also proves too that
Wow.
just because you say you're a Christian does not
Wow.
mean that spouse is walking with God. So,
Mm.
um, I wrote a book called Who's Writing Your Life that just kind of talks about different aspects of God, which is really good to go through. But two I want to highlight is called Christ's Exceptional Love. And that book is the journey of what is your definition of love? Where did it come from? What things does the devil use to kind of draw you in, and that he's been keeping you in the pit with these things? Then it talks
Mm.
about what Christ's love is, what's healthy and what's abusive. So it's kind of like this gradual walk of understanding more about what love is and really where Christ wants it to be. And that one comes, and I have a workbook with that one as well. And then my book fell down, so I have to get it. But the training that I did is called Resolving the Unhealthy and Abusive Marriage Pandemic. And my husband and I
Mm.
actually, it's online course if you want to take it that way, but we um, co talk this course. And it's the Unhealthy and Abusive Marriage Pandemic, because it is a pandemic. It's
Wow.
unbelievable numbers.
Wow.
Um, they say 40%. And every group I've talked to, it's at least 80% that somebody has dealt with it in the past, is dealing with it now, but it's 80%. And
Mm.
it's just the way it is. And it won't change unless we do something else. So this is titled A Faith Leader's Essential Training to Identify, Support, and Guide Victims. And like I said, that's an online course. It's a book too, but we have got to educate ourselves not only what abuse is so we can identify it, but how to help victims, what to say and what not to say. How do we make sure that if we're a pastor and the abuser comes to us, how are we not blindsided by them? How are we not sucked into their manipulations that they've learned how to do for their whole life and they're pros at? They're pros. How do we not get into those traps? And so it just gives us tools and what we need to do, um, and how we go forward.